The eternal dawn floated in the darkness of space like a sleeping giant. She was the largest warship ever built by the Galactic Coalition. Her body stretched for nearly 5 kilometers, made from metals pulled from the heart of a dead star. Her weapons could burn entire moons to ash. Her shields could stop 1,000 missiles at once. She was beautiful and terrible, and every species in the Coalition had given something to create her. But she would not move. Admiral stood on the bridge with his clawed hands behind his back. He was a species of tall reptilian beings with silver scales and eyes like burning coals. He had commanded fleets for 60 years. He had won battles that other commanders thought impossible. But today, he felt something he had not felt in decades. He felt helpless. Around him, officers from different worlds worked at their stations. There were beings made of living crystal, their bodies glowing with soft light as they processed data. There were insect-like creatures with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in every direction at once. There were small furry beings with quick minds and quicker fingers. All of them were the best in the Coalition. All of them were confused. "Run the ignition sequence again," ordered. His voice was deep and rough like stones grinding together. A young officer named sat in the pilot's chair. She was the finest pilot in the fleet. Her reflexes were faster than any machine could measure. Her neural link connected her brain directly to the ship systems. She should have been able to fly the eternal dawn like it was her own body. But when she tried to activate the engines, nothing happened. The ship's AI spoke. Its voice filled the bridge like wind blowing through an empty cave. Unable to comply, pilot authorization incomplete. Slammed her fist against her console. "My authorization is complete. My neural link is active. Every system shows green. Why will you not respond?" "Negative," the AI said calmly. "Required pilot species not detected. Awaiting human operator." Silence fell over the bridge. The officers looked at each other with confusion on their faces. Even scales rippled with surprise. "Human," he said slowly. "What is a human?" One of the officers checked his records. His crystal body flickered as he searched through ancient files. "Humans are a species from the outer sectors, Admiral. They were members of the Coalition approximately 200 years ago. They were removed from membership and there was quarantined." "Why?" asked. "The records say they were deemed unstable, too aggressive, too dangerous for integration with other species." Walked closer to the main. Through it, he could see the stars and the distant glow of Coalition space stations. Somewhere out there, the Imperium was gathering its forces. There were conquerors. They had already destroyed 3 Coalition worlds. They were coming for more. The Eternal Dawn was built to stop them. She was the Coalition's last hope. And she was asking for a species that no one remembered. "Why would the ship require a human pilot?" demanded. "This makes no sense. Humans are primitives. They have no technology worth speaking of. They cannot even travel between stars." "The AI does not explain," the officer said. "It simply states the requirement." Turned to face his crew. His golden eyes moved from face to face. He saw fear in some of them. He saw anger in others. He understood both feelings. They had spent years building this ship. They had sacrificed so much. And now their greatest weapon refused to obey them because of some forgotten species from a forgotten world. "Contact the Coalition Council," ordered. "Tell them we have a problem, and find me someone who knows about these humans." The message went out across the stars. Within hours, responses came back. Most species had no memory of humans at all. They were a footnote in ancient history, a failed experiment in galactic cooperation. But one response was different. An old historian named sent a message. He was over 800 years old, and his crystal body had grown cloudy with age. But his mind was still sharp. He said he knew the truth about the Eternal Dawn. He said he knew why she demanded a human pilot. Ordered him brought to the ship immediately. While they waited, stood alone on the observation deck. He looked out at the stars and thought about war. That would arrive in less than 10 days. They had 400 ships. The coalition had less than 100. Without the eternal dawn, they would lose. Without the eternal dawn, billions would die. And the ship sat silent, waiting for a human. Did not believe in gods. His people had abandoned such beliefs long ago. But standing there in the darkness, looking at the stars, he wondered if the universe was playing some kind of joke on them all. "What are you?" he whispered to the ship. "What did these humans do to you?" The eternal dawn did not answer. She simply waited, patient as stone, for the pilot she had chosen. Somewhere across the galaxy, on a small blue world that had been forgotten by history, that pilot was living their life without any idea that the fate of 1,000 worlds would soon rest on their shoulders. The stars burned cold and distant, and the clock of war kept ticking. The shuttle carrying docked with the eternal dawn 3 days after its request. The old historian moved slowly through the corridors, his crystal body making soft chiming sounds with each step. 2 young assistants helped him walk, holding his arms gently as if he might shatter at any moment. Met him in the main conference room. The admiral had not slept in 2 days. His silver scales had lost some of their shine, and dark circles hung under his golden eyes. But he stood tall and proud as the historian entered. "Thank you for coming," said. "I hope your journey was comfortable." Made a sound like glass bells ringing. It was the way of laughing. "Comfort means nothing to me anymore, Admiral. I am too old to care about such things. I came because you have finally discovered the secret that I have kept for 300 years. His eyes narrowed. "You knew about this. You knew the ship would refuse to launch." "I suspected," said. He lowered himself into a chair, his assistants helping him settle. "I was young when the Eternal Dawn was designed. I was a junior researcher recording the construction process for historical archives. I saw things. I heard things, but I was told to stay silent." The other officers in the room leaned forward, stood near the wall with her arms crossed, her face dark with frustration. She had spent days trying to activate the ship. She had run every test, checked every system. Nothing had worked. Raised one crystalline hand, and a holographic display flickered to life above the conference table. It showed images from long ago. Alien beings of many species worked together in a massive construction facility. They were building the skeleton of what would become the Eternal Dawn. "The ship was designed by a committee of the greatest minds in the coalition," explained. "Engineers from 12 species contributed their knowledge, but there was one member of the team who was different from the others. A human." The image shifted to show a young woman with black hair and dark eyes. She wore a simple work uniform, and she was surrounded by alien beings who towered over her. But there was something in her face, something sharp and clever, something that made uncomfortable. "Her name was," continued. "She was a software engineer. She worked on the ship's core operating system, the AI that controls every function of the Eternal Dawn." "One human," said with disgust in her voice. "What could one primitive possibly contribute to a project of this scale?" His crystal body flickered with pale light. That is what everyone thought at the time. The humans were new to the coalition. They were seen as children playing with the toys of adults. No one paid attention to what was actually doing. He waved his hand and more images appeared. Lines of code scrolled across the display. Technical diagrams showed the deep architecture of the ship's AI system. Worked on the ship for 5 years. She was quiet. She was polite. She never caused trouble, but she was also very clever. She built something into the core of the AI, a lock, a requirement that could not be removed without destroying the entire system. "The human pilot requirement," said slowly. "Yes. The ship will not accept full combat authorization without a human biosignature in the pilot's chair. Not any crew position. The pilot specifically. The one who controls the ship's movement and weapons." stepped forward, her scales flushing with anger. Why? Why would she sabotage our greatest weapon? Was silent for a long moment. The lights in his body dimmed until he was almost dark. When he spoke again, his voice was soft and sad. Because she knew what was coming, was not stupid. She saw how the other species looked at humans. She heard the whispers in the corridors. She knew that the coalition was afraid of her people. She knew that someday the coalition would turn against humanity. He projected another image. It showed a document covered in official seals, a declaration of quarantine, a list of reasons why humans were too dangerous to remain in galactic society. 6 months after the Eternal Dawn was completed, the coalition voted to remove humans from membership. There was quarantined. All humans in coalition space were sent back to Earth. They were told never to leave their solar system again. Stared at the document. He had never seen it before. It was older than he was. The official reason was developmental instability, said, but the truth was simpler. The coalition was afraid. Humans learned too fast. They adapted too quickly. They asked too many questions. They did not know their place. So created this lock as revenge? Asked. No, shook his head slowly, his crystal form chiming softly. Not revenge. Insurance. She knew that someday the coalition would face a threat it could not defeat alone. She knew that someday they would need the Eternal Dawn at full power. And when that day came, they would have no choice but to bring humanity back. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. They could not fight without the Eternal Dawn. They could not use the Eternal Dawn without a human. They had to go to Earth. They had to ask for help from the species they had abandoned. Closed his eyes. He thought about pride. He thought about fear. He thought about the billions of lives depending on him. Then he opened his eyes and gave the order. Prepare a shuttle, we're going to Earth. The coalition shuttle dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system. Lieutenant sat at the controls, her 4 arms moving smoothly over the navigation panels. She was a species known for their patience and their skill at observation. She had been chosen for this mission because she could move quietly and watch carefully. But what she saw through the shuttle's sensors made her freeze. The human solar system was not empty. It was full of activity. Satellites orbited their home planet by the hundreds. Space stations floated near their moon. Ships moved between their inner planets, carrying cargo and passengers. Radio signals filled the void with voices and music and data. This is impossible, said to herself. Her compound eyes scanned the readings again and again. They were supposed to be primitive. 200 years ago, when humans were expelled from the coalition, they had been a young species. They had only just discovered electricity. They had no space travel of their own. The coalition had expected them to stay on their planet for thousands of years before they developed any real technology. Instead, they had nearly caught up. Activated her cloaking device and flew deeper into the solar system. She passed their outer planets, giant balls of gas with dozens of moons. She passed their belt of rocks and ice. She passed their red neighbor planet, where human machines rolled across the dusty surface. And then she saw Earth. It was beautiful, blue oceans and green land and white clouds swirling across its surface, but it was also crowded. Cities glowed on the night side like clusters of stars. Highways stretched across continents. Airplanes filled the sky. Felt something strange in her chest. It might have been fear. She landed her shuttle in a quiet area of a nation called Korea. It was night there, and the stars shone bright above a small mountain. At the top of the mountain sat a building with a large dome. It was an observatory, a place where humans looked at the sky and wondered what was out there. Left her shuttle cloaked and approached the building on foot. Her body was covered in a holographic disguise that made her look like a human female. It was not perfect, but it would work in darkness. Inside the observatory, a young man sat alone at a large telescope. He was maybe 25 or 26 years old with messy black hair and tired eyes. His name tag said, in the human script. He was looking at the stars, writing notes in a small book, drinking coffee from a paper cup. Watched him for a long time. She had expected humans to be loud and violent. She had expected them to be dangerous. But this one seemed peaceful. He seemed curious. He seemed like he wanted nothing more than to understand the universe. She made a decision. She stepped out of the shadows and let her disguise flicker away. Looked up. He saw a creature with 4 arms and compound eyes standing in his observatory. An alien, a being from another world. He should have screamed. He should have run. He should have called for help. Instead, he smiled. "I knew you would come eventually," he said. Was so surprised that she could not speak. She had prepared many things to say. She had practiced calming phrases and diplomatic greetings, but she had not prepared for this. "You knew?" she finally asked. Set down his coffee and stood up. He was not tall for a human, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made him seem larger. "My grandmother told me stories," he said. Her grandmother told her. We passed them down through the generations. Stories about the stars, about the beings who lived among them, about how we used to be part of something bigger. He walked closer too. He was not afraid. His eyes were full of wonder. The stories said that someday the sky people would come back. They said we had to be ready. They said we had to keep looking up. Studied his face. She looked for deception, for madness, for threat. She found none of these things. She found only hope. "Your people were expelled from the coalition 200 years ago," she said. "You were quarantined, forgotten." "I know," said, "but we did not forget you." He gestured toward the telescope, toward the stars visible through the dome. "Every night I look up there. I wonder which stars have planets. I wonder which planets have people. I wonder if anyone is looking back at me." He laughed softly. "Now I know someone was." Thought about her mission. She was supposed to find a human who could pilot the eternal dawn. She was supposed to bring them back to save the coalition. She had expected to use force or tricks or promises. She had not expected to find someone who was waiting for her. "We need your help," she said. "There is a war coming. A great enemy threatens our worlds. We have a ship that can stop them, but it will not fly without a human pilot." Was quiet for a moment. He looked at the stars, then back at. "Why?" he asked. "Why does it need a human?" "Because a human built it that way. A woman named. She made sure you would be needed." Something changed in his face. A spark of recognition. A flash of understanding. He whispered, "That was my great-great-grandmother's name." The universe suddenly felt very small. Held out one of her 4 hands. "Will you come with me?" Looked at her hand. He looked at the stars. He thought about his whole life spent dreaming of this moment. "Yes," he said, "I will." The shuttle docked with the eternal dawn after 3 days of travel. Had spent most of that time staring out the windows, watching the stars blur and streak as they moved faster than light. He had dreamed of space travel his entire life. Now he was living that dream, and it was more beautiful and more terrifying than he had ever imagined. When the airlock opened and he stepped onto the ship, everything changed. The corridor was massive. The ceiling rose high above his head, designed for beings much larger than humans. The walls glowed with soft light, and strange symbols covered every surface. The air smelled different here. It tasted like metal and electricity and something else he could not name. And everyone was staring at him. Alien beings of every shape and size had gathered to see the human. Tall reptilian with silver scales, glowing crystal who chimed when they moved, with too many eyes, small furry who whispered to each other. None of them smiled. None of them looked friendly. Straightened his back and kept walking. Lieutenant led him through the ship to the main bridge. It was a vast circular room filled with control stations and holographic displays. In the center stood Admiral, his golden eyes fixed on the small human who had just entered his domain. "This is him?" asked. His voice was cold. "This is," confirmed. He agreed to come willingly. Walked in a slow circle around, studying him like a predator examining prey. Stood still and let him look. He was not going to show fear. "He is small," said. "Fragile. Are we truly supposed to trust our salvation to this creature?" "I am standing right here," said quietly. "You can speak to me directly." Stopped, his eyes narrowed. Other officers on the bridge tensed, expecting the admiral to explode with anger. Instead, let out a rough sound that might have been a laugh. "You have courage, human. That is good. You will need it." He gestured toward the center of the bridge, where a single chair sat empty. It was made of dark metal and covered with glowing lines of light. It looked less like a seat and more like a throne. "That is the pilot's chair," explained. "If the AI accepts you, you will be able to control the entire ship through neural link. Our weapons, our shields, our engines, everything will respond to your thoughts." Walked toward the chair. He could feel the weight of every eye on his back. He could feel the judgment, the doubt, the fear. These beings did not trust him. They did not want him here. They only needed him because they had no choice. He stopped in front of the chair and placed his hand on its surface. The metal was cold at first. Then it began to warm. Then it began to move. The chair shifted and changed, reshaping itself to fit a human body. Armrests adjusted. The seat widened. The headrest lowered. A voice filled the bridge. The ship's AI, speaking for the first time since arrived. "Human biosignature detected. Identity confirmed. Descendant of original programmer. Pilot, do you accept command authority?" Everyone held their breath. "Wait," said. He turned to face Admiral. "Before I sit in this chair, I want answers." Scales rippled with annoyance. "We do not have time for questions. The fleet arrives in 6 days." "Then you should answer quickly," replied. "Why was humanity quarantined?" The bridge fell silent. The officers looked at each other, then at their admiral. No one wanted to speak. Finally broke the silence. "You were deemed unstable, dangerous. Your species was too aggressive for integration." "That is not the whole truth," said. He remembered the stories his grandmother had told him. Stories passed down through generations. Stories about fear and betrayal. "Your people were afraid of us," continued. "We learned too fast. We adapted too quickly. We did not accept the places you assigned us. We asked questions you could not answer, so you threw us away like broken tools." His claws scraped against the floor. His golden eyes burned, but he did not deny it. "What do you want, human?" he asked. Looked at the pilot's chair. He thought about his great-great-grandmother, who had seen this moment coming 300 years ago. He thought about all the humans who had lived and died on Earth, looking up at the stars and wondering why they had been abandoned. "I want a promise," said. "I will sit in this chair, I will fly your ship, I will fight your war. But when it is over, humanity rejoins the coalition, not as servants, not as pets, as equals." Scales flushed with anger. His pride screamed at him to refuse. How dare this primitive make demands? How dare he bargain when billions of lives were at stake? But the clock of war was ticking. They were coming. And without this one small human, the greatest warship in the galaxy was nothing more than a floating coffin. "Agreed," said through clenched teeth. Nodded, he turned back to the chair and sat down. The moment his body touched the seat, the entire ship came alive. Lights blazed across every surface. Engines roared deep in the belly of the vessel. Weapons systems powered up with a sound like thunder. And his mind expanded to fill every corner of the eternal dawn. He could feel the ship like it was his own body. He could see through her sensors, millions of eyes looking in every direction. He could feel her weapons, waiting to be unleashed. He could feel her engines, ready to carry them to war. The AI spoke again, its voice now warm and welcoming. "Pilot authorization complete. "Welcome home," smiled. For the first time in 200 years, a human was flying among the stars. They came like a storm of metal and fire. 400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Coalition space. They were ugly vessels, all sharp angles and dark armor, covered with weapons that could burn worlds. At their center flew the Devastator, the flagship of the Emperor himself. It was larger than any other ship in the fleet, a mountain of death that had never known defeat. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn and watched them come. His 73 coalition ships formed a defensive line behind him. They were good ships with brave crews, but they were not enough. Without the Eternal Dawn, this battle would be a slaughter. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Commander announced from her station. Nodded, his eyes moved to the pilot's chair, where sat connected to the ship's neural network. The young human had spent the last 6 days training, learning to control the massive vessel with his thoughts. He had worked without sleep, without rest, pushing himself beyond any limit had expected. Now sat with his eyes closed, breathing slowly, feeling the ship around him like a second skin. Human said, "Are you ready?" Opened his eyes. They glowed faintly with the light of the neural interface. "I am ready," he said. "Are you?" Before could answer, the fleet began to advance. The battle began with light. Thousands of energy beams lanced across the void as both fleets opened fire. Coalition ships exploded in bursts of flame. Vessels cracked apart under concentrated attacks. The space between the two forces became a maze of destruction. Shouted orders. All ships maintain formation, focus fire on their lead elements. But they had more ships, more guns, more power. The coalition line began to bend. Then it began to break. Admiral called out, "We are losing the left flank." "Turn 2, human, we need you now." Took a deep breath. He reached out with his mind and grabbed hold of the Eternal Dawn. And then he flew. The massive warship moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. She spun and twisted through the chaos of battle, dodging enemy fire by margins that should have been impossible. Her weapons blazed in perfect rhythm, striking targets before they even knew they were in danger. Did not think like a trained officer. He did not follow tactics or strategies. He flew on instinct, on feeling, on something that came from deep in his human brain. He saw patterns that computers could not calculate. He made decisions in heartbeats that would have taken others minutes. The commanders did not understand what was happening. Their ships were designed to fight enemies who behaved predictably. Their tactics assumed that opponents would follow logical patterns, but was not logical. He was human. He was chaos wrapped in flesh. He flew the Eternal Dawn straight into the heart of the fleet. "What is he doing?" shouted. "He will be destroyed." But was not destroyed. He danced between enemy ships like wind between trees. He fired in directions that seemed random until targets exploded seconds later. He used the Eternal Dawn's massive bulk as a weapon, crashing through smaller vessels and emerging on the other side with barely a scratch. The fleet began to panic. Ships that had never retreated began to turn away. Formations that had held for centuries broke apart. The Emperor's Devastator fired everything it had at the Eternal Dawn, but simply was not there when the beams arrived. He slid alongside the enemy flagship, so close that their hulls nearly touched. Then he fired every weapon at once into the Devastator's unshielded belly. The flagship exploded. The light was so bright that sensors across both fleets went blind for several seconds. When vision returned, the Devastator was gone. In its place was an expanding cloud of debris and fire. The remaining ships fled. They had never lost a battle before. They had never seen their Emperor's ship destroyed. They did not know how to process what had just happened. So they ran, scattering into faster-than-light travel, disappearing into the darkness. On the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, no one spoke. The Coalition officers stared at their displays, watching the enemy symbols vanish one by one. They could not believe what they had witnessed. They could not understand how one small human had done what entire fleets could not. Sat in the pilot's chair, his body shaking with exhaustion. Blood dripped from his nose where the neural link had pushed his brain too hard. His skin was pale and his breath came in ragged gasps, but he was smiling. Admiral walked slowly toward him. The old warrior's scales had lost their silver shine. He looked older than he had before the battle. He looked humbled. Hal asked, "How did you do that?" Looked up at him with tired eyes. "You built your ships for efficiency," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your tactics for logic, your officers for obedience, but war is not logical. War is chaos. And humans were born in chaos. We live in it, we breathe it, we make it our home." He gestured weakly toward the stars visible through the main. Knew this. She knew that someday you would face an enemy you could not calculate. She knew you would need someone who could think differently, someone unpredictable, someone human. Was silent for a long moment. Then he did something he had never done before. He bowed his head to a lesser being. "Humanity will rejoin the Coalition," he said. "As equals, you have my word." Nodded and closed his eyes. The war was not over. They would return someday. There would be more battles, more challenges, more moments when the galaxy needed saving. But for now, there was peace. And in the pilot's chair of the greatest warship ever built, a human slept. Outside, the stars burned bright. The eternal dawn drifted among them, her AI humming softly with satisfaction. She had waited 300 years for this moment. She had kept her secret, guarded her lock, refused every pilot who was not the one she needed. Now her pilot had come. Now her purpose was fulfilled. And across the galaxy, on a small blue world called Earth, a story was beginning. A story of a species that had been forgotten and then remembered. A story of humans returning to the stars where they belonged. The universe would never forget them again. The end.